I'm Andrew Grant Mackenzie and I'm the Highland Historian. You can find out all about me at highlandhistorian.com. The camera's a bit shaky today because it's a little bit windy, so I'll have to be quick. But today's video is very important to me. It's all about the Battle of Culloden and the anniversary of the Battle of Culloden. The Battle of Culloden took place on the 16th of April 1746, and almost every year since 1925 there has been an anniversary organised by the Gaelic Society of Inverness. Unfortunately, in 2020, exactly 95 years from the first anniversary, which was held on Saturday the 18th of April 1925, there is not going to be a ceremony, and that's because of the outbreak of COVID-19. Every year since I've been working at Culloden Battlefield in 2008, I've taken with me a piece of variegated holly to the anniversaries. The reason for that is because that's my clan's plant badge. Now, you may have seen the video all about my cap badge, which is very important to me. It was something that has a very particular personal reason for being important to me. And behind that cap badge, you can see that I've got some variegated holly in my bonnet. Now, at the end of the ceremony, I would go off and I would find my own place, and I would place that sprig of holly into the ground on the Culloden moor. So the reason that I would place my variegated holly into the ground at Culloden each year after the anniversary is because it's got a very important meaning to me as a Mackenzie. It's the plant badge, or one of the plant badges of the clan, and it brings with it protective qualities. It's to protect against not only bad things, but also things like fairies, traditional things in Gaelic culture. Plant badges of many clans had medicinal value, but some of them had spiritual value, like this one. I can't make it to Culloden at this time, but what I'm going to do instead is toss this into the air and hope that the protective quality enters the air. Now, some might say that my reasons for doing that actually failed, because the reasons that I used to do that at Culloden from 2008 to 2018 was in order that the protection of that belief system would help to protect the ground there and also my work there. Unfortunately, I was made redundant in 2018 when the National Trust for Scotland became much more commercialised and started to turn its back on conservation. The conservation issue is a continuing issue, and right now there is a current proposal to develop at Muirfield, very close to the southeast corner of the Culloden enclosure, a very important geographical point on the battle site. Since 2018, there have been several developments. One at View Hill, which again is an incredibly important tactical area of the battle site itself, where 16 homes were built. There's been attempts at treetops at Culloden, which is undergoing review by the Scottish Government currently, and also now at Muirfield, as I've mentioned. This is an ongoing issue, and I hope that everyone watching will become involved in this issue and attempt, as I am, to speak up for conservation at Culloden Battlefield. As I've mentioned, since 1925, there's been an annual anniversary ceremony at Culloden Battlefield. That's been organised traditionally by the Gaelic Society of Inverness. It's rarely been cancelled, but this year, in 2020, due to coronavirus, that's had to be the case. It's incredibly unfortunate that that is the case, because on the 18th of April, which was this Saturday, it was going to be exactly 95 years since the first anniversary ceremony on the 18th of April 1925. So I'm going to read a little bit from the transactions of the Gaelic Society of Inverness from the annual meeting in 1925. Just before this took place in 1923-1924, there'd been some damage to the memorials at Culloden. Those memorials, the gravestones and also the cairn, had been put in place in the 1880s, and the historical accuracy of those monuments can be questioned, but that's something for another time. The damage was caused by an individual who became known in the press as the Butcher, after the Butcher of Cumberland, and the Gaelic Society of Inverness, which was newly formed at the time, decided to set up a fund and do some work to protect those monuments, and it is because of their work that the monuments and the grave area at Culloden is the only statutorily protected area of the entire battle site today. So what it says in the annual meeting minutes, it says, Culloden, during the summer, the work of restoration and repair undertaken by the Society at Culloden was completed. The subjects are now in excellent condition, and numerous letters of appreciation of the work done have been received. The total subscribed to the Culloden Fund is £550. Of that sum, £300 has been expended on the work. £250 have been invested in order to defray the expenses of future upkeep and repair. The council, however, would like to have a sum of £500 invested in order to meet future outlays out of revenue. The fact that the Gaelic Society of Inverness were budgeting and planning to put aside money for conservation at Culloden battlefield is incredibly important. That's something that is currently an issue, because money has not been available for conservation at Culloden when it was A, needed, and B, could have done the most good. From the 1930s, the National Trust for Scotland became landowners at Culloden, and they started to own little pockets of land through donation and also purchase. That development of land ownership went on until 2015. When I was manager at Culloden from 2014 to 2018, my belief and my plans for purchase of land at Culloden were to aim at some future point to be able to own the entire battle site for conservational purposes. That will probably never be quite possible, but the aim was important. When Black Park Farm, the majority of Black Park Farm, and also the majority of View Hill Farm came up for sale or became available to the National Trust for Scotland in 2015 for a very affordable price, I put to my local area managers and also my line management, as well as the directors of the National Trust for Scotland, that that land should be purchased for conservational reasons. The response from directors that was because it wasn't a money-making project, it wouldn't go ahead, and so the land was not purchased. It's a disgrace that so much damage has been able to be done to Culloden battlefield since 2018. It's a disgrace that we are not more in tune with the conservational issues at Culloden and why they are important. I hope that everybody watching will become involved in that conservational process at Culloden and speaking out for the conservation of our heritage, not just at Culloden, but all over the Highlands of Scotland. I'm going to read to you now from the Transactions of the Gaelic Society of Inverness, the report from the first ever organised commemoration at Culloden battlefield on the 18th of April 1925. On Saturday the 18th of April 1925, in the presence of a number of members and friends of the Gaelic Society, the Earl of Cassilis, chief of the society, placed a wreath on the cairn at Culloden Moor. Among those who witnessed the ceremony were Mr. and Mrs. Horatio McRae and party, Clunas, Dr. and Mrs. W. Mackay, Mr. and Mrs. Nicholson, Mr. and Mrs. G. Mackenzie, Mr. A. Miller, Swaziland, Mrs. E. C. Jack, and Mr. J. Grigger. Some of the relatives of those people still live in the area today and still attend the ceremonies. Mr. Nicholson, secretary of the society, deposited a wreath of laurel and poppy heads sent by Mrs. J. Black Stewart, Regent's Park, London. The wreath placed on the cairn by the Earl of Cassilis on behalf of the subscribers to the Culloden Memorial Fund bore the inscription "An Cúvne Air Nagaskich." The Earl of Cassilis, speaking in Gaelic, said he felt it to be an honour to deposit that floral tribute on behalf of the society. He observed, whilst in Japan during a recent tour, a great tendency on the part of the people there towards ancestor worship. This cult appeared very much in the Gaels. They not only reverenced their ancestors, but had the feeling that the spirit of them was in their thoughts. Those who stood around the cairn showed by their presence that they were keeping alive the spirit of the old Gaelic motto, which meant, "Remember the men you have come from." They commemorated that day not only those who fell on Culloden Field, but those who were most cruelly and barbarously done to death in and around it, and throughout the glens of Scotland, as well as in far-off lands. It was after the battle that terror was let loose throughout the Highlands, when fire and rapine destroyed the homes of many. Chiefs found themselves in exile, yet no man would divulge the hiding place of his master, not for 30 pieces of silver or thousands of gold. He liked to think of the story of one who was captured on the shores of Loch Doig and allowed his captors to believe he was the prince. He was slain while the prince was enabled to get safely away. When there were such chiefs as Macpherson of Cluny, who, in hiding, were fed by their tenants. Many of these tenants paid 2 rents, one to the Hanoverian government and the other to their lawful chiefs. Time brought changes, and they read of Flora MacDonald and her devotion to the prince, her later devotion when, at the time of the American Revolution, she charged her Highlanders to fight for the mother country. As a reigning race, the Stuart dynasty had passed. So too had the Hanoverians in the figure of Queen Victoria, of glorious memory. Today, in the person of His Gracious Majesty King George V, we have a king who was beloved of his people and shared our trials in the time of war. His love of heroic deeds was known, and if any proof were required, it lay in the fact that he was to be the donor of the granite for the memorial soon to be erected in the Flora MacDonald College of America. Since the 45, the Gael had proven his devotion to his country in no small measure. During the last war, many districts of the Highlands were depleted of able-bodied men who went to fight and to die for king and country. Those men, like MacCrimmon, would not return to them. Those who lay on Culloden Field would not return, nor would those who died in the Great War. But they lived in hope of going to them. Their love and devotion would ever remain the pride of the Gaelic race, whether in this country or scattered in many lands and diverse climes. And there was a break at that moment for quite large applause from the gathered. Dr. William Mackay thanked the Earl of Cassilis on behalf of the company for his presence and expressed the hope that while it was his first visit to the battlefield in the capacity of Chief of the Gaelic Society of Inverness, it would not by any means be the last. Piper Finlayson, Cameron Highlanders, played The Flowers of the Forest, and Mr. Morrison, Bogroy, the Macintosh Lament. Now, unfortunately, I'm not skilled enough to play the Macintosh Lament, and I can only basically play the Flowers of the Forest, but I'm going to play that for you now.